So welcome back to our Parsha
Oh,
discussion.
mhm.
We've been on Pesach hiatus for a while here, and we are picking back up in Parsha Tazria Metzora, is a double parsha filled with all of the laws and thoughts about what happens when you have tzarat, which is commonly translated as leprosy. And when I was a kid, you always made this project, the like Parsha project for, Orthodox day schools under fifth grade, was to make this hand that had leprosy on it, like a hand that would have like little spots, and fingers to the lips sign. Because Sarat and Lashon Hara were very heavily connected. And my father, who really disliked the like heavy midrash approach to teaching Parsha, would like have a fit every single time. He'd be like, "What does that have to do with Sarat? Does it say Lashon Hara anywhere in this week's Parsha?" And we'd be like, I don't know." So when I saw an article that was discussing that, I felt like that was too good to pass up. We can learn in memory of my dear father. I'll finally have an answer for him. So I'm going to share my screen here and think about, so Tzarat it's like hard to pick one pasuk that is like the baseline for Tzarat. But here, this is the pasuk that we'll look at a commentary on this pasuk. So I picked this one. This is in Tazria. So it says, Adam ki yeh ba'or basaro se'et o safachat o baheret, v'haya ba'or basaro lenega tzarat. So a person has something on the skin of the body, a swelling, a rash, a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection on the skin of the body. Something bad. We don't really know what this is. So when such a thing happens to you, you should report it to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons, the priests. So there's already, by connecting in the very first few psukim that talk about Tzarat, connecting it to Aaron, the Kohen, instead of, David, the doctor, is, I think, very much already a link saying there's something spiritual going on here. This is not like poison ivy, right? This is something different. So even though it is a physical manifestation, there's some other component to it, but it's not clear why you get it. And in fact, throughout this Parsha and Metzora, typo there, we see that you can get it on your skin, as is first discussed. You can get it on your clothing, or you can even get it on your home. And there's a lot of confusion as to whether it's a punishment or a sort of natural consequence, or Rashi even says, a crazy midrash, that when you get house tzarat, it's like a reward, because the people who inhabited Israel before us hid treasures in the walls of some of the homes. And when you have house tzarat, you have to sort of knock down a lot of walls and you'll be able to find the treasure. It's kind of like a crazy thing, right? But I think it just sort of shows how unclear the classical commentaries are about how to treat such a weird affliction. So a very famous, or I would say maybe like foundational text around what the heck is tzarat, is this Gemara in Archin, where Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Al shivad dvarim nagaim ba'in, that there are 7 reasons that you might get tzarat. And the first one is al lashon hara, right? So my moras weren't making it up. For malicious speech, al shvichat damim, for spilling blood, for murder, the al shvuot shava, for taking an oath in vain, the al gilui arayot, for forbidden sexual relations, the al gasut haruach, to being arrogant, the al hagezel, for theft, v'al tzarot ha'ayin, for being stingy. So this is a sort of wide-ranging list in a lot of ways, and you have to wonder why Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani puts malicious speech first, because that, and maybe taking oaths in vain, are maybe like, on the one side of the scale, but bloodshed, forbidden sexual relations, those theft maybe even are on maybe the other side of the equation. It's a wide ranging list. Interestingly, perhaps
where did you say you got this information from? Where?
this list, Archon is a Gemara. It's one of our, it's a smaller, very lesser known Masechet. And it's on page 16a, so first or second chapter. And it comes in a list of sort of other things. Right, the Gemara often sort of like winds its way. So this is not a Gemara about Sarat per se, but it comes up in the course of the conversation. So the truth is that malicious speech or lashon hara is not really such a crazy tradition for Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani to have, because the first case of tzaraat does seem to maybe have to do with lashon hara, right? And so if we look in Bamidbar, which we'll read in several weeks, in Perek Yud Bet Pasuk Aleph, it says v'tidaber Miriam v'Aaron b'Moshe al odot ha'isha hakushit asher lakach ki isha kushit lakach. That Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe because of the Cushite woman he had taken, like as a wife, saying perhaps he took a Cushite woman, right? And so then what happens? Ha'anan sar me'al ha'ohel, this is 10 psukim later, 9 psukim later, a cloud withdrew from the tent, v'hinei Miriam metzorat kasheleg. And she had, Miriam was stricken with snow white scales. And so there is a feeling, it's not the same word right away, but that she has some kinds of tzaraat. V'yifen Aaron el Miriam, and Aaron turns to Miriam, and Aaron is the expert, right? Because when you get tzaraat, you call the kohen, you don't call the doctor. V'hinei mitzorat, he turns to her, he sees her, and he says, "Oh my gosh, you have tzaraat." Right? I've seen dozens of cases in the midbar. Vayomer Aaron al Moshe, and Aaron turns to Moshe and says, "Bi Adoni al na tashet alinu chatat asher no alnu v'asher chatanu." Oh, my Lord, account not to us the sin which we committed in our folly. And so there's an assumption that this sin that Aaron and Miriam committed that Moshe didn't commit is this speaking against Moshe in the first pasuk. And so it seems as though from this narrative, if you speak lashon hara, then you will get tzaraat. Now, of course, this is not a perfect narrative because proof text, because Aaron never gets tzaraat. So he spoke lashon hara too. Why doesn't he also get tzaraat? And of course, I didn't bring this because it's not related, but tangentially, one of my favorite psukim in all of Tanakh is when Moshe turns to God and says, "Elna rafana la." God, please heal her, because I think it's such a moving, it's such an eloquent, beautiful pasuk. Debbie Friedman sings a lovely song about it. But it also to be like the big enough person to say, well, you were speaking about me, but I will pray, like I am the one who has the closest connection to God, and I will pray for you and I will ask you to be healed. I think is so beautiful. And then she is healed, right? So she doesn't get tzaraat necessarily in the same way. It seems like a little bit different. And Aaron doesn't get it. But there is some sort of feeling that perhaps there's an association between the two. So maybe that's why Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani thinks that tzaraat and lashon hara are connected, because it seems like in this first person that we know who gets tzaraat, it's because of some kind of lashon hara. So that's one possible reason. But Vayikra Rabbah has another interesting reason that's more phonetical. I don't think that's a word. Based on phonics. It says, Moshe mazhir et Yisrael. So Moshe warns Bnei Yisrael, va'omer lahem, and says to them, Zot tiyeh Torat HaMetzora, Torat HaMotzi Shemra. And so if you said, this is one of my children's favorite games, to say like one word so many times really fast that it sounds different, right? If you say Metzora and Motzi Shemra over and over, the idea is they sound very similar. Metzora, Motzi Shemra. And so the laws of tzaraat are about giving out a bad name, Motzi Shemra, to someone else. i.e. Lashon Hara. And so I think it's interesting to think, I'm not sure, Vayikra Rabbah is probably before Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, but it's interesting to think that maybe there was already the strong tradition because of Miriam of Lashon Hara being connected to Tzaraat, and so Vayikra Rabbah finds this, but no clear reason why, right? Even with Miriam, it doesn't say, and then Miriam got Tzaraat because she said Lashon Hara. And so they're trying to somehow connect the two, Metzora, Motzi, Shemra. So I think that between these three texts, right, the group of Bamidbars and the Gemara and Archin and the Midrash and Vayikra Rabbah, I think it's fair to understand why we connect Lashon Hara to having Tzaraat. But it's not a very satisfying answer, in my opinion, because there's no understanding of, causality or like what the purpose of tzaraat is as a punishment, maybe. So I want to look at two very beautiful, I think, texts that come at it from two different angles. So the first is the Kli Yakar. And the Kli Yakar here says, right, he quotes the Midrash. He starts by saying, oh, it's because it sounds like Motzi Shemra. And then he says, for he exposes and brings to the outside all of the evil inside of him. That there's this idea that right, when you say Lashon Hara, there's some kind of evilness or foulness inside of you. And Tzaraat like brings it up to the surface and makes your skin sort of ugly too, maybe is the idea, right? He says, but he strikes his fellow in secret with the lash of his tongue, and no one knows how to defend themselves from him, right? When we say Lashon Hara, Miriam and Aaron are no exception, you sort of whisper it on the side. And you could come home, and in fact, this is like one of those things that drives my mother crazy is I come home and I blow off steam and I'm like, can you believe what that person said? And she's like, how could you say that? And I was like, it's in private. It's not going to hurt anybody, right? Teenagers can be truly foul inside sometimes. And I would say, but it's not going to hurt anybody. And the Kli Yakar is saying, no, Lashon Hara always hurts somebody. And when you do it in private and you think no one will know, that's very dangerous. So what does God do? The Holy One makes it public before all his admirers, right? This nice person who seems so nice, but goes home and says Lashon Hara, and he brings all his wickedness out to the surface so that the evil will be revealed before the entire community, right? Kadesh nigla tigla ra'ato b'kahal. So I think there's something fascinating about this idea, right? That like, if you have an ugly inside, God is making your outside match. I think that maybe the other thing is like, what choices would you make if you knew that they were always going to be displayed on the outside? If you had like very thin skin, right? Like you could see sort of inside. I think it's a fascinating idea. I'm curious what other people think. Because on the one hand, as someone who, sometimes enjoys talking about other people, I feel like it's good to be able to have like a private space. That's the whole point of having a private space is you can do all the things you wouldn't do in public. Whether that's like eating potato chips late at night or chas v'shalom saying Lashon Hara, there is sort of a safety in your own space. On the other hand, I think that sometimes if you do it often enough on the inside, it sort of starts to leak out to the outside anyway, right? Once you feel comfortable doing something wrong in your own home, then it feels a little less scandalous to do it outside. Mm-hmm. So although the Kli Yakar I think is a little bit of a tough read, I think that there's something very real about it that I like. That if we thought about tzaraat or these like blisters that appear on your skin as a reflection of something that was going wrong inside of your body, it could be a sign to you, right? Oh, right? Said too much Lashon Hara this week. Got to change course. Right?
I said guilty,
Oh.
It's your guilt, that's showing through on the physical part of you.
Yeah.
So if they talk about it in this Parsha, whatever. I mean, you don't hear about it now. Did you
That
hear
was my
about
question.
it 300 years ago? No.
Yeah,
So
Yeah, so it does seem, and I think this is also one of the reasons the Mefarshim are so conflicted about what Sarat is all about, is it seems that it stopped happening very early on in our history. Right? We know Miriam got it. There are some other sort of famous cases in the Navi about people who are afflicted with Sarat, but then we don't really hear much about it. Like, it's not like Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani in the Gemara said, oh, my neighbor had Sarat, and I knew that he did one of these 7 things. It was already sort of gone by then.
right.
Yeah, please, Sherry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I read the Midrash,
Mm.
that book, and they had one sentence about it that they said that that had stopped happening after the destruction of the second temple.
Hmm.
The Midrash says, I read the chapter on this Parsha,
Mhm.
and that's what it said.
Did it say why?
Nope, just that one sentence.
I mean, I think that's sort of the end of any reported cases. And so maybe it's connected, right? Maybe if, I forget what I call this. So antidote or exposure. So I think Kliyakar is exposure, right? But maybe exposure is also an antidote because it allows you to correct course. And so we somehow lost that tool with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. That's certainly possible. I don't know. It's a great question.
You do know that Lashon Hora is a very bad thing, right? The Chafetz Chaim wrote how many books on Lashon Hora? And how everyone says you can't talk, it's so bad, it's such a bad, it's almost like a cardinal sin, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really bad. So it's not like Lashon Hora disappeared over the years. No, it's
Totally. Right. We seem to have lost the antidote or the exposure, but certainly, unfortunately, not the cause.
I think people are prone to Lashon Hora, don't you?
I certainly am. I would say it is one of my big challenges in life. And for me, it doesn't feel malicious. I'm interested in other people and what they have to do and say.
I think
I was going to say, is there a difference between gossip and Lashon Hara?
I don't know. I don't think so, according to this body of halacha.
Oh, okay.
But I think I sort of feel in my heart maybe that I'm exposing myself on recording and to this group of close friends that it's very hard for me because I truly struggle with it. I don't know if I told you this story, but when you said the Chafetz Chaim, Anna, reminded me, I have a very dear friend, Ilan, and when we would sit around in his house gossiping, his mother would run in and pick up the telephone. It'd be hard to do these days. And she'd say, oh, hello, what is that, Chafetz Chaim? Okay, I'll tell them. And then she would hang up the phone and walk back out. And so I was like, Mom. But it was like the most gentle, loving way she could say, guys, stop talking about each other, right? I think for me, it's like a way of processing, especially as a teenager with a group of friends. It's like a way of processing what's happening, who's doing what in the world. But I think that the reason that we come down so hard on it in Jewish tradition is that it's very dangerous. It could very easily slip out of control, right? It could very easily go from, oh, do you think I would wear a shirt like that? So like, did you see that shirt that she was wearing that made her look like X, Y, or Z, right? And to ruin someone's good name, right? And that goes back to the Motzi Shemra, Metzora connection, right? What is gossip? It creates a bad name for someone else. I think that's strong. Something we have to really guard against, but it's hard for sure.
My feeling was with Lashon Hora, it was like if you spoke something bad about someone, that was Lashon Hora. But then I learned that that's not necessarily the only thing Lashon Hora is. You could even be speaking something, you might say something good about someone and they might react by saying something, oh no, that person isn't that great. You know what I mean? So it's very touchy. I don't know. But I don't see that Lashon Hora has gone away necessarily, right?
Can I say something?
Please.
Yeah, my camera is not working, but I've been present all the time. I don't know what's happening. But I think current times has an example of how bad Lashon Hora can be magnified many times with technology. That's the effect of bullying online that we see, driving kids to commit suicide because of the evil talking, spreading rumors, true or not true, but having a certain power over the person that you were talking about.
Right.
Yeah. It's such a good point, right? We see it is so dangerous. And social media is an interesting example of this, right? That people can look perfect on social media. What do they call it? Fake booking, right? That you sort of put out this image of yourself that is very beautiful, right? And the Kli Yakar is saying you can't leave that, right? God is saying you can't leave that perfect image. If you're going to do things that push people to hurt themselves or wish that they could harm themselves, then you need to have an ugly outside, because then people will know, oh, that Yael, she just tells Lashon Hara. We don't have to worry about her. Don't even listen to her, right? Like there's some element of like, it's a warning for other people. Don't take her seriously. She just says mean things about, I mean, chas v'shalom, I've worked very hard on my Lashon Hara habits, but right, I think that's sort of the point of the Kli Yakar. And I agree, Nelson. I think we really do see that today.
You see that a lot on that TikTok, don't you? The teenagers are listening and looking at the videos, and then they think they're not adequate. I mean, I don't know too much about TikTok, but I know it's creating a lot of problems, a lot.
Yeah. And I think if our outsides matched our insides, it would be less popular, right? Part of the allure of those video platforms.
Yeah.
You can dress yourself up as something you're not.
So this is a metaphor for this would be Dorian Gray.
Okay. Can you say more for people who might have
the
forgotten?
inside and the inside and the outside. The outside is smooth and beautiful and young, and then the dark picture that's kept up in the attic that nobody can see is the real person.
Yeah.
And how that real person has changed and become disfigured and ugly.
Interesting. Right. And what does that do? What does that do to a person? You know, to have, like on some level, it's like to have to maintain that beautiful facade is almost harder, right? If you have, you end up working on the wrong problem. Maybe that's what I would say. Instead of working on your inside, you work on maintaining your outside.
Right, making the outside very appealing and smooth and acceptable.
Yeah.
But it's a dark inside.
Yeah. And that sort of, that festers, right? In dark ways. So I want to look at the Sfat Emet, and I apologize that I could not find it in the Hebrew text. I took this translation from a Parsha blog that I like, and I went looking in my Sfat Emet, but of course it's like one of his most prolific Parshiot, and I could not find this piece here. But when he talks about Metzora, Tzara'at, he says, it is known that the Torah would not ascribe an evil thing, heaven forbid, to the blessed Creator, for from God only good comes forth. That's an interesting statement. I think that it feels interesting to me, right? We know that sometimes, you know, bad things happen in this world that we ascribe to God. But for him, this feeling or this theology is the baseline to say, so it seems that this is a gift that the blessed Creator gives to the children of Israel. So Tzara, it can't be a curse or a punishment, because for the Sfat Emet, that's not possible. In order that evil cannot stick inside of them, it must be pushed to the surface. And that is why the Tzara comes. And so in my great search for the Hebrew of this, I read many interesting Sfat Emets on the Parsha. And the Sfat Emet was interesting in the play on words between or as skin and or as light. And so he talked about how when Moshe comes down from getting the Aseret HaDibrot, his skin is glowing. There's like a light because his skin, it has turned to light. But what happens when you sin is that your skin becomes sort of like more opaque and the darkness gets tucked inside, right? The light can't shine through. And so what does the Sfat Emet say? Tzara'at is a way of pushing all that bad stuff out. You know, it's like putting a hot compress on like a open wound to pull out the bad toxic stuff on the inside. And in that way, right, I think the Dorian Gray model is interesting, right? It's almost as if God is saying, relax. This that thing is terrible, but you could just pull it out of you, right? It's okay. You don't have to pretend to be perfect on the surface. And in that way, I think it's really meant to be an antidote. You said something wrong, and now instead of letting it fester, God says, let's just pull it out, right? Spend 7 days outside of the camp and then come back in, and you can truly come back with a sense of a peace, an inner peace, because the bad has been pulled out to the top.
But you have to change your ways, right? You
Yes.
can't-
Well, so you do, but to get rid of Tzaraat, you have to go sit outside the camp by yourself
Mhm.
for a week. And so I think the feeling of the Sfat Emet is like, that's the time where you work on yourself. Like if you have a bad habit, instead of saying, oh, I'll work on that tomorrow, right? God is saying, no, actually, let's like pull it out and we'll work on it now for 7 days. And when you come back to the camp, you can create a better boundary, right, for yourself or for your community or whatever that thing is. And so I think the Kli Yakar and the Sfat Emet are similar in some ways, but they really have like a different idea of what that pulling it to the surface is about, sort of like punishment, exposure, or some kind of treatment to help you get better, which I thought was beautiful. In thinking about the different ways that we can interpret Tzaraat.
Now, I have a question. So from the Sfat Emet, it sounds like Hashem gave Tzaraat only to the children of Israel? Well, it says he gives.
Yeah, it's
What
a great
about the other
question.
people?
It's
What
a great
about-
question. In the Navi, the most popular person who has Tzaraat is a non-Jewish general. So it's a great question.
Mhm.
The most like well-known case of Tzaraat.
So the Goyim can get it too, correct?
That's certainly what the Navi seems to imply. But you're right. I mean, I think the Sfat Emet just is only concerned with Jewish people. And so it might have been given to everyone, but from his perspective, like it's only given as a gift to Bnei Israel.
Right. What a lovely gift, right?
Well, so that's the thing, right? It's like, it's easy to read the Sfat Emet and be like, that's crazy. And on the other hand, I think, and I think that this is the danger of social media, to Nelson's point, right? Is that like, it's sometimes when something festers, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And when you do it in public and then you feel like you have to like keep up that sort of public persona, I think there's actually like a relief to the Sfat Emet. Or I feel like a sense of relief, like, okay, I could just own that this is a problem and I can address it and move on. I don't have to be that person who says mean things, right? Who brings out evil with my words anymore. I can address it.
And also, I don't have to be that perfect person that I'm portraying.
Yeah.
I'm not that perfect person, right?
Yeah.
I like very much the Viktor Frankl logotherapy approach to things. And from his point of view, this would be something like giving a gift. The gift would be a challenge to give you a chance to look into introspection and to make a decision to change your life. Like we'll say, go, here is what you have to do now. Go make tshuva so that you can become a better person. So that's the silver lining of the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. An opportunity. I like that. Yeah, I think in this week of counting the Omer is the week of Gevura, which is all about sort of creating healthy boundaries or right, the strength to say no in some ways, the sort of like restraint or discernment that you get from, making choices, right? To say, well, it would be easier to just keep on saying Lashon Hara. But, as like in the logotherapy way, right? I'm going to have some restraint. I'm going to choose to do this other thing. And I'm going to take it on in a positive and powerful way. And I think that it's hard, but the Sfat Emet is helping reframe it as a gift and not a punishment, which I think is just a nice way of thinking about anything bad, right? Like, how can we find the silver lining, as you said, Nelson, to the Tzaraat?
Right.
I used to have a resident. We were making rounds in the intensive care unit, and she would say, "Oh, unfortunately, the patient came to the hospital with a heart attack." And I would say, "Unfortunately, no. fortunately, you are here to take care of the patient. So that's the looking at the positive side of things.
Right.
Right. And I am certainly not a doctor, but I imagine that untreated heart attacks are much worse, right? Lead to further complications if you leave heart disease untreated. And so, right, in some ways that like almost reminds me of this, right? It's bringing the problem to the surface where it can be addressed instead of, pushing through.
And don't they also call that reframing? Trying
Reframing.
to say
good.
things in a positive light, take something
Right.
bad, turn it around and look
Yeah.
for the good part of it, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Perfect analogy. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that Scott Emmett is a reframer that's like fits very well in his sort of methodology. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Well, it's always a challenge to find something nice to share on the Parsha of Tazria Metzora. So I am so thankful for everyone's comments that helped make it a really rich and powerful piece of thought instead of, some yucky skin disease.
Well, we're just
So-
reframing our thinking about
Exactly.
Sarah, right? And everything else in the
Yeah.
Parsha. Okay.
I wish everyone a week filled with healthy reframing and getting, not just bringing to the surface, but completely eliminating the things that might make us feel that yuckiness inside or outside.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Soon.
Thank you.
Bye, Shalom. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
Good night.